Today's class is Get Started, Fly Through Setup, and Get Up and Running Fast. So we're going to go over some really useful features in QuickBooks. I'm going to show you some key things that are going to be really useful when you're actually doing your own work in QuickBooks. Kind of get you more comfortable with working in QuickBooks is the goal of today's class. So we're going to talk about connecting your bank account to download transactions directly from your bank. That's a huge time-saving feature in QuickBooks. So we're going to go over that first thing. Then we're going to look at how to get around in QuickBooks Online. If you're new to QuickBooks or any program, it can feel intimidating to get in there and try to get work done, but you don't know where things are. So I'm going to show you where everything is. And the good thing is QuickBooks Online, it's very easy to find what you're looking for. I'm going to talk about working with lists to organize the information that you use on transactions. We're going to look at some list techniques and talk about how to set up, edit, or delete list entries. Then we're going to go into the transaction section of our class. We're going to actually look at recording some transactions in QuickBooks. So we're going to start off with expenses. Those are less fun to think about, so we're going to get that out of the way first. I'm going to show you how to record a check in QuickBooks and talk about how QuickBooks handles a lot of those expenses for you. Then we're going to look at sales transactions, which, this is where we're getting money and our customers are paying us. So we're going to save the best for last. We're going to look at the two sales workflows and how to use those properly in the different situations when you might use one sales workflow over another. And we're also going to look at how all these transactions that we enter into QuickBooks tie back into online banking once those transactions are downloaded from your bank. So a lot of good stuff in today's class. So let's go ahead and jump in to QuickBooks. Just a moment to pull up my dashboard. There we go. All right, so I'm in QuickBooks now, and we're going to start off with talking about online banking. So the online banking feature, I've already mentioned this, but it's true, so I'm going to say it again. The online banking feature is one of the best time-saving features in QuickBooks. It can save you so much time with data entry, and it makes it really easy to ensure that what you have in QuickBooks is accurate based on what happened at the bank. Now, when you first log into QuickBooks, you see your dashboard. This is just a whole bunch of information about, how you're spending money and your income status, all of that, a little bit of profit and loss. But also to the right, there's a list of your bank accounts. This is where you can see all of your bank and credit card accounts as well. They're going to appear in this list too. So down near the bottom of this list, it's kind of hard to see because I think my browser setting is a little bit weird, but there's a link here that says Connect Accounts. If you click on this, QuickBooks is going to, can't click on that. Normally you'd be able to click it. Again, I think my browser is just behaving a little strangely. So instead I'm going to go over to the banking page. And up here at the top, I'm going to close out all of this. Up here at the top right, there's an option to add an account. So I'm going to click that. Now, if it's the first time you're connecting an account at all, your page is going to look a little bit different, but there will be a button that you click to start the connection process. So what we're going to do now is select our bank. So we can enter the name of our bank, or we can click our bank from down here from these popular banks. I'm going to click on Chase and then continue. So when I do that, QuickBooks is going to pop up a window and it's going to ask for login information for my bank account. So it's taking a moment to load. Oops. Right, so it's kind of working slow, but basically what's going to pop up in this window is going to be fields that you'll use to log in to your bank account on your bank's website. Use the same login information that you use over there. And what you're doing when you enter that login information is you're basically telling QuickBooks that it has permission to receive transactions from your bank, and you're telling your bank that it has permission to send transactions to QuickBooks and that QuickBooks is allowed to see those. That's all you're doing. Nobody at Intuit is going to see your login information. Your login information isn't stored anywhere. Nobody can, look at your QuickBooks and see your bank account numbers or anything like that. It's really just setting up a permission between your bank and QuickBooks to receive and send those transactions. This isn't loading for some reason, not sure why, but basically you just see fields in here to log into your bank account. Now, once you log in, some banks are going to give you an option to download a specific date range of transactions. Some banks, though, don't give you that option, and it automatically downloads the last 90 days of transactions. In some cases, that's perfectly fine. You can start off with those 90 days of transactions and you're good. But very often people will ask, well, how do I get more transactions into QuickBooks? Well, it's very easy to do that, which is very nice. So on the banking page, and we got here again by clicking banking on the left navigation bar, on the banking page, there's a button that says File Upload. So if I click on File Upload, QuickBooks is going to take me to a page where I can upload a transaction file from my bank. You can also connect another account right here if you wanted to. So what you're going to do is you're going to log in to your bank account on your bank's website, and you're going to look for a transaction file, or where you're going to look for a place to download a transaction file rather, to import into QuickBooks. Now the formats that you're looking for are these formats right here: CSV, QFX, QBO, or OFX. That's what you're looking for. Now, it might not be called exactly these file extensions on your bank's website. You might need to do a search in help to find where to download this from on their website. You can search for Quicken transaction file or QuickBooks transaction file, and most banks should be able to understand what you're looking for when you put that in. So when you go there to download the file, you're going to set the date range for transactions you want to put in that transaction file, download it, and then you're going to come back here, upload the file in this field, and then click next, and you're good. Those transactions are brought over. Now, once you set up the connection, QuickBooks is going to continually download transactions as they clear through your account. There's no need to, reinitiate a download or anything like that. It's going to happen automatically. When transactions are downloaded, they're going to come over to this bank and credit cards page. And while they're sitting in this list right here, this is where they show up, they are not affecting any of your account balances. These are new transactions that QuickBooks knows about, but it hasn't put over into your actual accounting yet. What we need to do is go through and add information to these transactions, like an account, a payee, and then add that in to QuickBooks. And I'll show you that here in just a few minutes. So basically, this is a transaction waiting room. None of these transactions are impacting anything yet until you initiate that. I'm going to scroll up to the top of the bank and credit cards page because I want to point out a little bit of navigation here. So we do see our connected account right here at the top. This is my checking account. So you're going to see all of your connected accounts listed up here across the top of the page if you have more than one. I only have the one though. Now on this account card that we see, there are two balances. One is a bank balance and one is an in QuickBooks balance. And there are a lot of questions around what these balances are based on. So this bank balance is based on transactions that have actually impacted your bank account. So any deposits that have actually cleared, any checks that have actually cleared, all of that is what this balance is based on. The in QuickBooks balance is based only on transactions that are actually in QuickBooks. So the reason these balances are different, it makes sense if you think about how, transactions flow through your bank account versus how they're entered into QuickBooks. So inevitably, your bank is going to know, quote unquote, about transactions before QuickBooks does. If you have automatic drafts, if you have a deposit that clears that you haven't entered into QuickBooks, then there's going to be an impact there. Any transaction that goes through the bank account that hasn't been entered into QuickBooks is going to impact this balance right here. This in QuickBooks balance is based, again, only on transactions that are actually in QuickBooks. So again, you're going to enter transactions in QuickBooks before your bank knows about those transactions. So any handwritten checks, you're going to be entering those. That's going to impact this balance. Any deposits you record in QuickBooks but that haven't taken place at the bank yet, that's going to have an impact. So very often these balances are going to be different. It's fine, nothing to worry about. It's just because these balances are based on different things. This yellow number right here is the number of downloaded transactions that we have to work with. So down here, right above the list of transactions, we have 3 tabs. One is the For Review tab. These are transactions, again, that are downloaded, but we need to approve them, basically, before they can show up on our reports. Reviewed is where a transaction goes after you approve it, either by adding it or matching it to an existing transaction. And then excluded, if you need to exclude a transaction, that's where those transactions are going to show up. So let's go ahead and work with some of these transactions just so you can get an idea of the workflow. So these are coming in sorted by date. The newest transactions are at the top. I'm going to sort this list by the match column. It's going to put the 4 transactions I'm going to work with all together. Makes it a little bit easier to demonstrate. So I have 4 transactions here from the Cheesecake Factory. I spend a lot of money at the Cheesecake Factory, apparently. So let's look at what we need to do for this downloaded transaction. The first field that we need to fill in, or that we could fill in, rather, is the payee. And if you notice in light gray letters right here, it says that the payee is optional. You don't have to have a payee associated with this, because really all this transaction is you spending money at some establishment, and that's really all QuickBooks needs to know. Now, if you want to be able to see where you spent this money or the exact location that you spent this money on, then you could put a payee here. Again, not required, but adding a payee does give you more filtering capability on your reports. It also gives you more information. More information is always useful, especially when we're talking about accounting. Now, in this situation, I have 4 transactions with the Cheesecake Factory. Maybe I go to a lot of other restaurants too, Chili's, Applebee's, Taco Bell. We all have different places we like to do business lunches, but maybe it's not important for me to keep track of every single one of those establishments individually. So instead, for transactions like this, I could set up a generic payee. Like in this case, I could set up a payee called restaurant, and I can assign this restaurant payee to all of my restaurant transactions. I'm going to add that to my vendor list. There we go. So now I've assigned restaurant. Next, we need to choose a category or an account. These are accounts that come from our chart of accounts. If you want to learn more about the chart of accounts, we are having an Accounting 101 class this afternoon. You should definitely come to that if you have the time, because it really helps you understand how the chart of accounts feeds in to your financial statements. So I'm going to click this drop down to choose the appropriate expense account. Meals and entertainment is good. So that's all I need to do for this transaction. So it was downloaded as a new transaction. I don't have anything in QuickBooks for this expense yet. So I'm just going to click add right here. And QuickBooks adds that transaction as a new transaction. I can find that on reports. I'll show you that in a moment. But I want to deal with these other 3 Cheesecake Factory transactions. So at the top of the transaction list, we can see all of our transactions, or we can also look at just recognized transactions. I'm going to click recognized. So we have 3, and all 3 of them are with Cheesecake Factory. So this is a good illustration of how QuickBooks learns from you as you record transactions through online banking, or accept transactions through online banking, I should say. It's going to remember what you selected on previous transactions with the same vendor or with the same bank detail, and it assigns the same options to those transactions, like the payee, the account, that sort of thing. Now, if I click on this transaction, I can change any of these selections if I want to. It's not like we're stuck with these choices, but it is kind of nice to have QuickBooks learn from you and then do some work for you. Anytime QuickBooks can do something for me, I'm on board. Okay, so we have 3 transactions here. I know that all this detail is correct. I don't need to change any of this stuff. So I'm just going to select all 3 of these, and I'll click Batch Actions, Accept Selected. Now those transactions are in QuickBooks. We can go back to the list of all of our transactions and work with these. And we're actually going to come back to this list at the end, or towards the end of class, when we're actually working on entering transactions ourselves. So I told you those transactions are now in QuickBooks. In fact, if we go over to our reports page, there we go. I'm going to look at my profit and loss report. And I'm going to scroll down to my expense accounts, and I want to look at this one right here, meals and entertainment. If I click on this balance, then QuickBooks pulls up a transaction report showing me what is involved with that amount for that expense account. And here we see those 4 Cheesecake Factory transactions are now in QuickBooks. So, really cool, powerful feature, that online banking. Now, I showed you how to add new transactions from this page by adding a payee, assigning an account, and then clicking add. But what about situations where you've entered a transaction in QuickBooks and then that same transaction gets downloaded from the bank? I'll show you how that works a little bit later. Basically, QuickBooks does a cool thing where it sees the transaction you've entered, it sees the downloaded transaction and identifies that those are the same thing, and you just go through and approve that match. And again, I'll demonstrate that later, but it helps you avoid getting duplicate transactions, which is a huge concern that we often see when people are thinking about going over to online banking in QuickBooks. So that's banking. What I want to do now is transition into how to get around in QuickBooks, or navigation. So QuickBooks Online makes it really easy to learn where things are, because there are really just 3 main points of access, which is nice. There are fewer places, if you are, not sure where the thing is that you're looking for, there's only a few places to check. You're not going to be searching forever, but it also makes it easier to remember where everything is. So those 3 places are the left navigation bar, then we have the gear menu, then the create menu. So let's go through each of these things. So first, left navigation bar. You kind of saw a little bit of me using this already, but this is basically where you can see historical information about your company. So if you look at the banking page, that's going to be transactions that have affected your bank account. If we look at expenses, we can see a list of all of our expense transactions that we've already recorded and our list of vendors. We're going to look at that vendors list here in just a little bit. If we look at sales, we can see all the sales transactions that we've already entered. We can see our list of customers, our products and services, all right here that we've already set up. Reports is where you go to run reports to find out about transactions that have been recorded, see how your business is doing. You look at your balance sheet, your sales reports, all of this. Again, those reports are showing you information based on transactions you've already recorded. Accounting, this is where you go to see your chart of accounts that you use on transactions and reconcile your bank accounts, which you should do on a monthly basis. But yeah, that's the left navigation bar. Basically, if you've entered something in QuickBooks already, this is the first place I'd recommend to go to find it. I'm going to go back to my dashboard. I want to talk about the gear menu. The gear menu is kind of your set it and forget it menu. You're not going to be interacting directly with this menu very often, because it has some things that you don't need to work with all the time. So, for example, company settings are in here. You're not going to need to change and modify those company settings very often, most likely. So you probably get them set, and then you try not to mess with them as much as possible. Users, not going to be setting up new users very often. Other lists here that you don't interact with very often, most companies don't interact with very often directly. Importing data, reconciling, budgeting, all of that, again, something you might need on a monthly basis, but not on a daily basis necessarily. So this is, a menu that's full of important things. It has your company settings and where you add users and all of that, but you don't need to access this on a regular basis. The menu that you're going to use most often and get most familiar with is this menu. It's a plus sign. This is the create menu. So if you want to create a new transaction in QuickBooks, come to the create menu, and it's shaped like a plus sign. So if you think about, I need to add something new to QuickBooks, go to the add menu. It's a good way to remember that. So all the transactions in here are split up by, area. So we have customer transactions, vendor transactions, employee transactions, and then other transactions that don't fit in specifically with customers, vendors, or employees. So this is a nice, easy to read menu. If you're looking for a particular transaction type, it will be in here. Now there's one more menu I want to point out, and it's the search menu. If you click on this, you're going to see recently entered transactions. So there are those 4 expenses that I just accepted through online banking. You can also search for transactions right here. Now I do want to look at a couple of transaction forms in QuickBooks. So I'm going to click the create menu, and I'm going to start by looking at the invoice form. I just want to kind of show you what you see on the forms in QuickBooks because, again, if you're new to entering transactions, it can feel a bit overwhelming to have to suddenly fill out new transactions. But the good thing about QuickBooks Online is all your transactions look very similar, so it makes it very easy to know what information to enter where. So on our invoice form, for example, we have 4 primary pieces of information that we need to fill in. First is the customer. So this is who is involved with the transaction. This is the person that we're selling these goods and services to. So who's involved? Next, we have the date of the invoice. So when the transaction is taking place. Down here under product service, we're going to put what the customer is purchasing. And then over here, we put the amount or how much. So those are your 4 elements: who, when, what, and how much. So that's on an invoice. And we're going to see this invoice form again, and I'm going to talk about some customizations you can do here in a few minutes. But I'm going to close out of that and go to a different transaction form. So I'm going to go to the create menu or the plus menu, and I'm going to look at a check. So a check is a different type of transaction that we use for a different purpose, but the pieces of information that you fill in are in the same places. So first, up here at the top left, we have the payee field, so who we are issuing this check to. Then we have the date of the check, so when the transaction is taking place. Down here under category details, we're going to put in why we're spending the money, so what is involved with the transaction. And then we have how much over here to the right. So who, when, what, and how much. Same bits of information, different transaction forms, but it's just to show how comfortable you're going to get, how quickly you'll be able to get comfortable with filling in these transactions. All right, so we're going to close out of that. And I want to transition now to talking about lists. So lists are basically where you store the information that you use on transactions. So the main lists that you're going to use most often are going to be your vendors list, your customers list, and your products and services list. Now, another really important list in QuickBooks is the chart of accounts, which you access from the accounting tab. We do have a class that goes over the chart of accounts more specifically. We actually have it later this afternoon, which I've already mentioned, but I mention it again because it is such a nice starting point for anybody who's not just new to QuickBooks, but new to any kind of accounting or bookkeeping stuff in general. Now let's look at the customer list. I'm going to go to sales and select customers. All right, so here's our customer list. Now, who goes on the customer list? Your customers are people that you sell things to. You charge them for goods and services, and they pay you at some point. Hopefully, they pay you at some point. So at the top of the customer list, we see some filters that we can use to focus on certain customers that have paid in the last 30 days, ones with open invoices or overdue invoices. And down here, we see a list of all of our customers. Now we can customize this list a little bit. If you click this settings menu right here to the right, we can, let's say we want to see the address column. So I can click on that. And we don't need to see the currency column. You can take that off. So it makes the list a little bit more customized to what we would prefer to see. Now, if you want to add a new customer to this list, just click New Customer up here at the top right. And QuickBooks will open up the customer information window, and you can enter their name, address, contact information, all of that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Let's say you need to look at, a customer's information in a bit more detail. Right now, we're seeing all of our customers, but we're not seeing all their transactions. So I'm going to click on Amy's Bird Sanctuary. And here we can see all the transactions associated with Amy's Bird Sanctuary. And if we go over to customer details, we can see her address and phone number information and all of that we've entered. If you need to edit a customer information, you can just click Edit right here. And you can change any of this information and then click Save to save the changes. That's basically it. If you need to remove a customer from your customer list, you can make them inactive. So that's going to make it so you can't select the customer on new transactions, but it's going to keep all their transaction history. But that's where you go to do that if you need to. So that's the customer list. Let's look at the vendors list now. So I'm going to go to expenses. I'm going to choose vendors. This is our vendor list. It looks very similar to the customer list, which is kind of cool. The look is very uniform throughout, but vendors, the people who go on this list are people that you purchase things from. So you purchase goods and services, you pay rent to your landlord, they would be a vendor. So those are some examples of vendors. Navigation of this list is very similar. If you want to add a new vendor, click the new vendor button at the top right to enter their information. And we have these filters up here at the top. We can also, if we click this settings menu, in the same place as we saw in the customers list, we can add columns, can add the address column, take away the currency column, hide the phone number column. So we can make it look how we want to. If you click on a vendor name, you can see all the transactions associated with that vendor. We look at vendor details, can see their information that we've entered on the list. And if we need to change anything, we can click edit to edit their entry. Now, when I click edit, there's also the option down here to make the vendor inactive. So you need to remove a vendor. It's the same process as removing a customer from the customers list. So that is the vendor list. And just briefly, I want to look at the products and services list. I'm going to go to sales, products and services. And this list is where you keep track of the things that you sell to your customers. So if you need to add a new product or service, just click new up here at the top right. Now, a common question that I see when it comes to setting up products and services is, what's the difference between non-inventory and service, and does it matter? And the answer is it doesn't really matter. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to click on non-inventory to set up a non-inventory item. So I need to fill in the name, of course, the sales description that shows up on the sales form, the price that we sell it for, and the income account. This should be increased when we sell this. So that's what we need to fill in for a non-inventory item. I'm going to click Change Type up here. and I'm going to choose service instead. Now look at the fields we have to fill in now. Fill in the name, okay, sales information, sales price, and the income account. So it's the same information that you're filling in. Service items and non-inventory items do not behave differently accounting-wise. The difference is really just in the name. Where you do need to be careful is if you're setting up an inventory part or an inventory item, you need to make sure that you actually choose inventory when you're doing that because there's special accounting that's going on there. We do have a webinar recording on how to set up inventory in QuickBooks if you're interested in looking at that. But if you're setting up any other type of item that's not inventory, don't worry about the difference between non-inventory and service. It doesn't matter. Okay, so that is a look at lists. I do want to mention one last thing on the chart of accounts. I'm going to click chart of accounts from the left. If you want to add a new account, same thing, just click new, add a new account. If you need to edit an account, click the action drop down. You can choose edit right there. You can make the account inactive as well or run a report. Okay, so let's look at entering some transactions. We've looked a lot at, navigation and all of this. So let's get to actually entering some transactions in QuickBooks. And we're going to start with expense transactions. As I mentioned, we like to think about those as little as possible. So let's think about them first to get them out of the way. So let me just make sure I'm at the right place. There we go. Okay. So on my screen right now, I have a PowerPoint slide talking about the types of expenses that QuickBooks can help you with and which ones you need to handle. So QuickBooks can handle all expenses except checks for you. So here's what I mean by that. Credit card transactions, debit card transactions, EFT, ACH, wire transfers, bank charges, all of that is going to get automatically downloaded through that banking page that I showed you earlier. And then you're going to, like you saw earlier, go through and categorize those transactions, teach QuickBooks how to assign accounts to those transactions. And over time, the more you work with those, the more QuickBooks is going to enter that information for you. It'll get easier over time. Again, huge time-saving feature using this online banking option because you don't have to manually enter all those transactions yourself. The transactions you still need to handle yourself, though, as far as money out transactions, are checks. And there are a couple reasons for this. So if you enter a bill payment check that is intended to pay multiple bills, you want to be sure to record that in QuickBooks first before it's downloaded, because you can only link a transaction to a single transaction. It's not going to let you choose multiple bills for that. Also, if you have handwritten checks, be sure to enter those because you want to be sure you have a record of that check as soon as possible, because a lot of times, you give somebody a check and they either lose the check or, something happens and they end up not cashing it. And you never have a record of that check if you don't enter it into QuickBooks. So you want to make sure you have a record of that so you can always, at least know you issued that check. So if you need to follow up and void the check, you can do that. And there's, usually a lot of time between issuing a check and when it actually clears through the account. So you want to be sure to be on top of that. Also, entering the check yourself is going to ensure you have the check number, because a lot of banks don't send over check numbers in that transaction download. So you want to be sure you get those. Now, when the transaction is downloaded from your bank, it will match it to the one that you've entered. So since I've been talking so much about entering checks yourself, let's go ahead and enter a check in QuickBooks. You can see how this works. So I'm going to go to the Create menu and I'll select Check. There we go. I don't know why that's not going away. There we go. Okay, so first I'm going to choose the Payee. So this is going to be a check to Lee Advertising, my advertising agency. I'm going to put the date of the check, so when the check is taking place. There we go. Check number is 100, and this is a handwritten check, so I'm not going to select the print later box. Category details, this is what's involved with the transaction. So this is going to be for advertising. I always recommend people put descriptions in the description fields to make sure that you have as much information with the transaction as possible. Because right now I know that I'm issuing this check to pay my advertising agency for a brochure, but somebody else who looks at this check in a week or even later this afternoon might not know exactly what's going on. If I just have the expense account here, I might not know why this check was entered for advertising. If I don't put a description here, when I look at it 2 months from now, I might be confused. So put in a description is what I'm saying. So signed new summer brochure. I think summer starts this weekend, so we're a little bit behind, but okay, the amount, this is going to be for $135.31. Okay, and that is our check. Everything looks great, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Close. So now we have the check in QuickBooks. We've recorded that. So at some point, Lee Advertising is going to take that check to the bank and deposit it in their account. And that's going to be downloaded from our bank. So let's look at what happens when that occurs. So I'm going to go over to the banking page. And here's my list of transactions. Notice check 100 has been downloaded and QuickBooks has found a match to the downloaded transaction. This is how QuickBooks helps you avoid duplicate transactions. So I'm going to click on this. So notice here's the downloaded check and here's the one that I just entered. So we're basically at this point just confirming that what we recorded in QuickBooks is accurate based on what happened at the bank. And QuickBooks is really good at identifying these matches for you. Sometimes it might find more than one possible match. In that case, you just select the match that is most correct and you're good. So there's nothing else we need to do here. I'm just going to click match. And now the transaction is matched. So what I just did, again, the check was always in QuickBooks. It was in QuickBooks as soon as I saved it. But when it was downloaded, QuickBooks was just making sure that they were the same transaction. So helping us avoid duplicates, helping us look out for ourselves a little bit. Good guy QuickBooks, I guess. Okay, so that's expense transactions. Now let's talk about sales transactions. These are a lot more fun to think about. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here. We're going to talk about these sales workflows. So there are two different sales workflows that you're going to be using in QuickBooks. Which one you use depends on the nature of the sale. Basically, whether your customer is paying you now or if they're going to pay you later. So the first question you should ask yourself when you're thinking about which sales workflow to use is my customer paying at the time of the sale? If the answer to this question is yes, then you're going to use the sales receipt workflow, which is 2 steps. Enter the sales receipt and then deposit your customer's payment. So let's say if your customer is paying you right now, the sale basically opens and closes right there on the spot. If your customer is not paying at the time of the sale, then you're going to use the invoice workflow. And this is 3 steps. You enter an invoice, you receive or record the customer's payment, and then you deposit the customer's payment. That's it. So these are your 2 workflows. Again, think about the sale outside of QuickBooks, and that'll help you determine which workflow you should use in QuickBooks. I'm going to demonstrate both of these today. So I'm going to come back into my QuickBooks, and we're going to enter a couple sales. So I'm going to start with the invoicing workflow. This is where your customer is paying you later and you're involving accounts receivable in the transaction. Basically, accounts receivable is where QuickBooks keeps track of what your customers owe you. So I'm going to go to the Create menu. Actually, first I want to start by going to the customers list. Okay, so I have a customer here, Dylan Solfrank. No balance, he doesn't owe me anything. So I'm going to go ahead and enter an invoice for him. So I'll go to Create, select Invoice. Okay, so we need to put in a customer here. we go, Dylan Solfrank. Now notice when I fill in his name, QuickBooks pulls in his email address and his billing address and his terms. This is all coming from the customer's list and the information I have for him entered over there. So the more information you have entered for your customer, the more is actually going to come over to your sales forms automatically, which is always nice. Now over here to the right, next to the email field, we see these options for online payments. This is basically where you can turn on the option for your customers to pay you online if you have the Intuit payments service set up. Now, if you want to see a demonstration of how this works with invoicing and customers paying you online, you should come to our Get Paid class. That's going to show you how easy it is to work with this online payment function right here. It's a great way to make sure your customers pay you online. I think it dramatically increases the likelihood your customers will pay you not only on time, but early, making it easy. Now you can customize this form a little bit if you click the settings menu at the top right. We're going to see a flyout that shows us fields that we can add or remove from this form. So right now I have shipping fields turned on, so I see shipping address, ship via, shipping date. So I'm going to uncheck shipping. So I don't want those fields. I also have custom fields that I've added right here in my settings. I'm just going to uncheck those. We don't need them. Now I want to talk about this option, custom transaction numbers. So if I select custom transaction numbers, what this is going to do, it's going to let me set my own invoice numbering sequence. This is a question that we see a lot. So QuickBooks starts numbering your invoices from 1,000 when you're just getting started. If you want to change that, you can turn on this option right here. And when I do, I have an invoice number field that shows on the form. So this is where I can set my own sequence if I want to start at 3,000, for example. This invoice will be number 3,000. The next invoice that I go to enter will be 3,001 and so on. So that's how you can set that numbering sequence yourself. Let's see the date. Yeah, that's a good date. Down here, I'm going to fill in what my customer is purchasing. So this is going to be gardening. And the description for the product or service comes over from the products and services list. This is the sales description that I talked about earlier. The quantity, this is going to be 16 hours of gardening. So it's a $400 invoice. So that's it. This is my invoice. So I'm going to click Save and Send. So when I do that, QuickBooks pulls up the email window. So it shows us the subject, the body of the email. We could also turn on the online payment options right here if we wanted to. Here's the invoice our customer is going to receive. I'm going to click Send and Close. And that's it. That's entering an invoice. So here's Dylan Solfrank, the customer I just entered the invoice for. If I click on his name, I can see that he now owes me $400. So if you have the option turned on for your customers to pay you online, there's nothing else you have to do. It's all taken care of from here. But if you receive payment from your customers through some other method, maybe they give you a check or they send you payment through some other merchant services processing company or something like that, then you'll need to record the payment separately in QuickBooks yourself. So to do that, I'm going to go to the Create menu and I'm going to choose Receive Payment. There we go. So I'm going to fill in my customer name, Dylan Solfrank. And here's the invoice that I just entered. So we're going to select this for payment. I have a good customer who's paying the same day as the invoice. So here in the middle, I need to enter payment information. So the payment method, I'm going to put check. And the deposit to field, I want to talk about this. So I'm going to select undeposited funds right here. Right now, checking is selected. What we're telling QuickBooks in this deposit to field is where this check is going next. So by next, I mean, is it going to go to a blue vinyl bank bag in your desk drawer, a lockbox in your accounts receivable department, or is it going directly to the bank on its own without any other transactions or checks? So if this check is going to be deposited at the bank. It's going to be physically taken to the bank with other customer payments and other checks that you need to deposit, then you want to use undeposited funds to group that with those other payments that are going to be deposited. If this check were going to the bank by itself, we could choose the bank account here and it's fine. But we're going to do undeposited funds. So I'm going to click Save and Close. So that is the invoice workflow. Now you might remember there's one more step in the workflow, which is to deposit the customer payment. But I'm going to come back to that after I show you entering a sales receipt, because it all kind of ties together at the end there. So let's enter a sales receipt. I'm going to go back to my customer list here. So I want to look at, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to enter a sales receipt for Laura's customer. Doesn't owe me anything. So let's go to the create menu and I'm going to choose sales receipt. All right, so I'm going to fill in the customer. Now on the sales receipt form, the customer field is optional. You don't have to fill in a name here because QuickBooks doesn't have to keep track of an open balance with anybody. So it doesn't require a name. They're paying us now. So if it's not feasible for you to keep track of all your customers, if you're a retail operation that has tons and tons of different customers and you don't need to keep track of each individual one, you can leave this field blank. But I just want to point that out. Actually, there we go. I'm going to fill in a sales receipt for Laura's customer. The product or service, I'm going to sell her a fountain for, I'm going to give her a special rate, $227.17. So here in the middle, I need to enter payment information. So this is just like, you know, what we filled in on the receive payment window for the invoice workflow, but we're filling out the sale and the payment at the same time. So let's say she's giving me a check and I'm going to deposit this to my undeposited funds account, just like I did that other payment. So this all looks good. We're done. So I'm going to click Save and Close. Right, now if we look at the customer, Laura's customer, notice they still don't owe me anything. That's because she already paid me. So there's no balance to keep track of there. Now let's talk about undeposited funds a little bit more. So I'm going to go to my chart of accounts and I want to look at these balances. Okay, so right here I see my checking balance is $22,638. And if I scroll down a bit, my undeposited funds account has $627.17 sitting in it. I'm going to take this $627.17 and deposit that in my bank account. So what's going to happen when I do that? I'm going to have a deposit in QuickBooks for that amount. And when that deposit clears through my bank account, it's going to be downloaded. So that's why we use undeposited funds, so that what we have in QuickBooks matches what we're going to download from the bank. It also makes reconciliation a lot easier, and it really helps with online banking if you're using undeposited funds when you're, you know, receiving customer payments and depositing them all together. So that's why we use the account. It's just to help everything match in as many places as possible. So let's go ahead and record this deposit. So I'm going to go to create, select bank deposit. QuickBooks is thinking, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to deposit this into my checking account. Here's the balance right here. The date, I'm going to change that to the 6th. So here are these two payments that I need to deposit. One is the payment on the invoice and one is the sales receipt. So I'm going to select these and that's it. So we can see the total of the deposit is $627.17, which is the total that we have in undeposited funds. So I'm going to go ahead and just click Save and Close. And then we're going to come back to the chart of accounts just real briefly. So I want to look at my undeposited funds account, which is now at 0. So we've moved that deposit into the checking account. Real quick, I want to go back over to the banking page because I told you I'd show you what happens when that deposit is downloaded. And here's what happens. QuickBooks identifies it as a match to the one that you've already recorded. So just click on that. All looks good. So I'm going to click match. Easy peasy. So that's kind of a good, pretty full picture of how online banking works in QuickBooks, both with new transactions and when existing transactions are downloaded. It's a pretty easy tool to work with, and it can save you a lot of headaches in the long run. And that is it for today's session. We will see you at an upcoming session.